They asked how deadly right arrow savage one human marine was. The truth broke the Academy in a future far from Earth. Humanity was no longer the dominant species in the galaxy. Most advanced races had long left them behind, viewing them as primitive and unworthy of serious attention. The galaxy was ruled by powerful empires, and humans were scattered across distant, forgotten colonies. Their military might nothing more than a shadow of what it once was. They had been hunted, tested, and nearly wiped out, but they had survived. And in survival, there was strength. Jack O'Connell was one of those survivors. He was born on one of the harshest worlds, a place where only the toughest lived. It was a barren, desolate planet on the edge of known space, with nothing but rocky cliffs, harsh winds, and dangerous wildlife. If you wanted to survive there, you had to be strong, physically and mentally. Jack learned that from an early age. He had lost his family in the early days of his childhood, a victim of the galaxy's relentless wars. From that moment, he was alone, but it didn't matter. He was tough. He had to be. His reputation as a fighter spread far beyond the small colony he was born in. People would tell stories about the boy who survived impossible odds. No one could understand how he did it. No one knew where he came from or how he had become so deadly. He just was. He was the one who killed the giant sand beasts that threatened the colony. The one who took down entire gangs of raiders alone. And when the last war came to his world, Jack fought through it like a force of nature. But he wasn't interested in the fame. Jack didn't want to be known as a hero or a legend. He just wanted to survive, to keep going, no matter what the galaxy threw at him. To him, survival was the only thing that mattered. It was the one thing no one could take from him. Then one day, everything changed. The Galactic Military Academy sent a message. It wasn't unusual for them to recruit from the smaller, tougher planets. Humanity was known for being fierce, even if they lacked the advanced technology other races had. But Jack wasn't like the others. He wasn't a typical recruit. They didn't want him because he was special. They wanted him because they believed he could be shaped into something greater, something the galaxy had never seen before. The Academy was one of the most prestigious training grounds in the galaxy, a place where only the best soldiers were made. It was where elite warriors from all the galactic empires went to learn how to fight, to lead, and to conquer. If you were trained there, you were considered among the most dangerous soldiers in the galaxy. Jack wasn't sure if he wanted to join. He had never trusted authority, and he hated the idea of being part of something bigger than himself. But something inside him, maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was the desire to see what else the galaxy had to offer, pulled him toward that academy. It didn't hurt that his reputation as a ruthless survivor had already spread, and the academy saw potential in him that they couldn't ignore. When Jack arrived at the academy, he was immediately met with doubt. The instructors and students weren't sure what to make of him. He wasn't like the others. He was rough, raw, and far from polished. His uniform didn't fit well, and he looked out of place next to the other recruits who came from high-tech planets and elite military backgrounds. But there was something about his eyes, the coldness in them, the fire that burned deep within. He had a look that told you he had seen things that others couldn't even imagine. It wasn't long before the other recruits began to notice him. He didn't speak much, and when he did, his words were short and to the point. But he didn't need to say much. His actions spoke louder than anything he could have said. In the first training exercise, the recruits were tasked with taking down a group of robotic enemies in a simulated combat zone. The others, relying on strategy and teamwork, struggled to complete the mission. Jack, however, didn't hesitate. He attacked the robots head-on, taking them down with an ease that left everyone in awe. He didn't wait for orders. He didn't ask questions. He just did what needed to be done. The instructors were impressed, but they were also curious. How had he done it? How had one human managed to accomplish what a dozen others could? They chalked it up to luck or perhaps the boy's natural instincts. But they didn't know what Jack knew. He had been trained for survival his whole life. There was nothing in that simulation that could scare him. He didn't need advanced tech. He didn't need fancy tactics. He just relied on himself, on his ability to fight and survive. As the days went on, Jack continued to stand out. He excelled in combat drills, outperforming his peers at every turn. He was faster, stronger, and more focused. His physical strength was unmatched, but it was his mind that truly set him apart. He saw things others. He noticed details, read situations before they unfolded, and anticipated his enemy's every move. It was like he could see the future. His instructors began to take note of his potential, but they still didn't know what to make of him. Jack wasn't there to make friends, and he didn't care about earning the respect of others. He was there for one reason: to survive. To prove that he was the best, that no one, no matter how advanced, could defeat him. But even he couldn't have predicted what would happen next. The academy had always been a place of intense competition, but now something darker was starting to take shape. Jack's reputation had spread beyond the academy walls. Other soldiers from across the galaxy were hearing about the savage Marine. Some were intrigued. Some were fearful, and some were determined to break him. One day, during a routine training exercise, Jack found himself up against a team of Zorvans, the most dangerous soldiers in the galaxy. The Zorvans were known for their ruthless efficiency and advanced technology, and they had never lost a battle. The other recruits were nervous. They knew what the Zorvans could do, but Jack wasn't afraid. He stepped onto the battlefield with a calmness that unnerved even the most experienced soldiers. The exercise began, and the Zorvans immediately moved to surround Jack. They had the numbers, the tactics, and the firepower, but they didn't have what Jack had: sheer willpower. Jack didn't hesitate. He fought with everything he had, using his knowledge of the terrain and his natural instincts to outmaneuver the Zorvans. Within minutes, he had taken down half their team. The rest of the Zorvans hesitated, not sure what to make of this human Marine who was taking down their best soldiers with ease. When the simulation ended, the Zorvans were defeated, and Jack was standing alone in the center of the battlefield, victorious once again. The academy staff were stunned. No one had ever defeated the Zorvans in that simulation, let alone a single human. Jack didn't care about the applause or the recognition. He didn't need it. But in that moment, something changed. The academy and the galaxy began to see Jack for what he truly was: a force of nature, a living weapon forged in the fires of survival. They had asked how deadly the human Marine was, and now they knew the answer. The truth had broken the academy. The galaxy would never underestimate humanity again. The days that followed Jack's victory over the Zorvans were filled with whispers. The academy was buzzing with rumors of the mysterious human Marine who had not only survived, but dominated in every combat scenario. His reputation spread quickly across the galaxy, far beyond the walls of the academy. Jack O'Connell, the savage Marine, was becoming a name to fear. But Jack wasn't interested in fame. He wasn't even sure what he was looking for. He only cared about one thing: survival. One day, Jack was called to the academy's command center. The voice over the intercom was stern, with no room for questions. "Report to the command center immediately." Jack had been expecting another routine exercise, but as he entered the room, he realized something was different. There was a map on the large screen at the front, showing a planet Jack had never seen before. "This is Zeros," said General Cray, a tall, imposing figure who had overseen the academy for years. "A planet that has been untouched by any civilization for centuries. It holds secrets, secrets that are crucial to the future of the galaxy. We need someone with your abilities, Jack, someone who can handle what we can't. You are being sent to Zeros to retrieve an artifact that could change everything." Jack didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He had faced dangerous missions before. This was just another one. He stepped forward, accepting the mission with his usual cold indifference. But as General Cray continued to explain, Jack began to realize this mission was unlike any other. Zeros was not just any planet. It was shrouded in mystery, a forbidden world that had been avoided by all galactic races. There were rumors, of course, whispers of an ancient power buried deep beneath the surface. Some said the planet was cursed. Others believed it was home to an ancient alien civilization that had long since vanished. Whatever the truth, it was clear the artifact hidden on Zeros held immense power. And for some reason, the Academy thought Jack was the only one capable of finding it. The Academy assembled a small team of elite soldiers for the mission, but Jack was the leader. He was the one they trusted. The team included Lieutenant Cira Novick, a brilliant strategist, and Sergeant Kai Carter, a weapons expert with unmatched skill in demolitions. There were others, too, but Jack knew he didn't need to rely on anyone else. His instincts had always guided him, and he would let them do so again. As the crew boarded the ship and headed towards Zeros, the tension was palpable. The mission was dangerous, but Jack felt a strange sense of calm. He had faced death countless times before, and it no longer scared him. The journey took several days, but Jack spent most of his time in solitude, thinking about what lay ahead. He wasn't interested in the artifact itself. His goal was simple: get in, get the job done, and get out. The rest didn't matter. When the ship finally landed on the planet's surface, it was like stepping into another world. The landscape was unlike anything Jack had seen before. The sky was a deep shade of violet, and the air was thick with an eerie stillness. The planet seemed to be frozen in time, with vast deserts of sand and jagged mountains rising in the distance. There were no signs of life, no movement, just an overwhelming silence. Jack led the way, his team following closely behind. The terrain was treacherous, and the atmosphere made every step feel like it was dragging them down. The closer they got to the artifact's location, the more intense the feeling of danger grew. There was something about the planet, something that made the hairs on the back of Jack's neck stand on end. It was as if the planet itself was alive, watching them, waiting for them to make a mistake. They traveled for hours, pushing through the harsh conditions. The team was on edge, constantly checking their surroundings, aware that they were being watched. Jack, however, remained unfazed. His mind was focused on the task at hand, blocking out the unease that surrounded them. He had faced worse. He had survived worse. It wasn't until they reached the edge of a massive cliff that they realized they weren't alone. Hidden deep within the mountains, a vast structure emerged from the rock, an ancient temple of sorts, covered in strange, glowing symbols. It was unlike anything Jack had ever seen before. The temple seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, and as they approached, Jack could feel the power emanating from within. "Looks like we found it," Lieutenant Novik said, her voice shaky with awe. She was usually calm and collected, but there was something about this place that made even her uneasy. Jack nodded, his expression unreadable. "Let's move." They carefully approached the entrance, but as they neared, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The air thickened, and a strange hum filled the atmosphere. Suddenly, the doors of the temple burst open, revealing a dark, empty hall inside. The hum grew louder, and a flash of light shot from the depths of the structure. "What the hell?" Sergeant Carter muttered under his breath, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. Jack motioned for silence, his eyes scanning the temple. Something was wrong. He could feel it deep in his bones. This wasn't just a mission, it was a test. As they entered the temple, the air grew colder, and the walls seemed to close in on them. The path ahead was narrow, and the eerie hum grew louder with every step. Jack could see the flickering light ahead, and he knew they were getting closer to the artifact. But what lay ahead wasn't just an ancient relic, it was something far more dangerous. Something the galaxy was never meant to uncover. They reached the inner chamber, and there it was, a pedestal surrounded by glowing runes with an artifact resting on top. It was a small object, barely noticeable in the dim light, but it radiated a strange energy that made the air feel heavy. Jack took a step forward, but as he did, the entire temple began to shake violently. The ground cracked beneath their feet, and a deep voice echoed through the walls. "Leave this place," the voice commanded. "You are not worthy." Jack's instincts kicked in. He immediately drew his weapon, signaling the team to prepare for a fight. But it wasn't the voice that worried him, it was the presence that followed it. Something ancient, something powerful was waking up, and Jack wasn't sure they would make it out alive. With a swift motion, Jack grabbed the artifact and held it aloft as the chamber erupted in chaos. The air filled with energy, and a massive surge of power exploded from the artifact, sending shockwaves through the room. Jack's team scrambled, trying to stay on their feet as the entire temple seemed to come alive around them. The hum grew louder, turning into a deafening roar. Jack was certain they had awoken something they weren't meant to find. As the room continued to tremble, he knew that what had started as a simple mission to retrieve an artifact had turned into a battle for their lives. "Get out of here!" Jack shouted, pulling the artifact close to his chest. "Now!" But it was already too late. The walls of the temple began to collapse, and the very ground beneath them split open. They had awoken something far older, far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. And now, there was no turning back. Jack and his team fought their way through the crumbling temple, the artifact in hand, but the deeper they went, the more dangerous it became. The ground shook and the air grew thick with energy. Jack could feel the power of the artifact coursing through him, but he didn't know if it was enough to escape. He glanced over his shoulder, seeing his team struggling to keep up. They were falling behind, and Jack knew they wouldn't make it if they didn't move faster. He pushed forward, his heart pounding in his chest, knowing that this mission had just turned into something much larger than himself. The temple was collapsing around them. The walls groaned under the weight of centuries, cracks spreading like veins across the stone. Jack felt the pressure rise in his chest as the floor beneath their feet trembled with each shockwave. The artifact in his hands pulsed with an otherworldly energy, but it was not enough to keep the chaos at bay. There was something ancient and powerful about this place, something that had been sleeping for a very long time, and now it was waking up. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he glanced over his shoulder at his team. Sergeant Kai Carter was already at the rear, covering their escape with a steady stream of fire. Lieutenant Sira Novik, though she had maintained her cool earlier, now looked pale and disoriented. The tremors were getting worse and the air had thickened with an oppressive energy. They were running out of time. "Move," Jack barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Get to the exit now." They rushed through the collapsing corridors, the noise of crumbling stone echoing behind them. The artifact, which had once seemed like a simple object, was now radiating power so intense it made Jack's skin tingle. But it wasn't just the artifact that was causing the turmoil. It was the temple itself, the very heart of the ancient civilization that had built it. They had awakened something in this place, something that no one was meant to disturb. With a final, thunderous crack, the ceiling gave way behind them. Rocks fell large enough to crush anything in their path. Jack moved faster, pulling the artifact tighter against his chest as he darted through the debris. His team followed, their feet pounding the stone floor, but they weren't fast enough. The collapse was accelerating. They reached the exit, but what they saw outside stopped them in their tracks. The sky above the temple was dark, swirling with dark clouds. The once violet sky had turned into a storm of reds and blacks, lightning flashing across the horizon. It was as if the planet itself had become angry at their intrusion. "Get to the ship," Jack shouted. "Now," but it was already too late. As the team scrambled toward their escape, the ground beneath them cracked wide open, and a deep, terrifying roar echoed from the depths of the planet. Something had been unleashed, a force greater than any of them could comprehend. Out of the ground, from the very heart of the temple, emerged a figure. It was massive, towering over them, its body covered in glowing runes that pulsed with ancient energy. Its face, if it could be called that, was a mask of stone and shadow, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the very soul. The figure moved with a grace that belied its size, its presence suffocating the air around it. Jack and his team froze. They had no idea what this creature was, but they could feel its power, its raw energy coursing through the ground beneath their feet. It wasn't just the power of the artifact they had taken. It was the power of something much older, something from before the galaxy had even formed. The creature spoke, its voice like thunder, reverberating through the very air. "You have awakened me," it said, its voice low and rumbling, "and now you will pay the price." Jack's instincts kicked in. He raised his weapon, aiming it at the massive creature. But before he could fire, the air around them shimmered, and a powerful shockwave knocked them off their feet. The ground cracked even further, and the sky above darkened as if the creature's words had summoned a storm from the depths of the planet itself. "This isn't just a fight for survival," Jack muttered to himself as he pushed himself back to his feet. "This is a fight for everything." He looked over at his team, each of them struggling to regain their composure. They had faced battles before, but this was different. This was no enemy they could simply shoot or outsmart. They were up against something ancient, something that existed long before the galaxy had been born, and whatever it was furious. "Fall back," Jack shouted. "Get to the ship now." But as they turned to flee, the creature moved faster than anything they had ever seen. With a single, powerful motion, it sent a blast of energy toward them. Jack barely managed to roll out of the way, but the blast tore through the ground where he had been standing, sending debris flying in all directions. The team regrouped, realizing they were outmatched. They had no idea what they were up against, but Jack could feel that they had just stumbled into something much bigger than a simple mission. They were in the middle of something ancient, something that had been waiting to be awakened. And now they had to deal with the consequences. "We can't fight this," Lieutenant Novik said, her voice strained. "We need to get out of here, we can't beat it." Jack didn't respond. He knew she was right. They couldn't beat this creature. Not with their current weapons, not with anything they had. But they had one thing on their side: time. If they could get to the ship and escape, they could regroup and find another way to stop this. "Move!" Jack shouted again, leading the charge toward their escape route. But the creature wasn't going to let them leave. As Jack and his team made their way toward the ship, the ground cracked open again and the figure stepped forward, blocking their path. Its glowing eyes locked onto Jack, and for a moment everything stopped. "You cannot escape," the creature said, its voice chilling and filled with ancient power. "The artifact you carry is mine, and you will never leave this place alive." Jack's grip on the artifact tightened, and he knew there was no more running. The creature had already decided their fate, but Jack had always been a survivor, and now he had to figure out a way to survive this. He wasn't going to let this being, whatever it was, take everything he had worked for. "We don't have to fight you," Jack said, his voice steady. "We don't want your artifact, we just want to leave." The creature's eyes flashed with a terrible light, and for a moment Jack thought they had made a mistake. But then, to his surprise, the creature stopped. It seemed to consider his words, the ancient power in its eyes flickering for just a moment. "You do not understand," the creature said. "You have already awakened the power of the ancients. There is no going back. You will either serve the power you have unleashed, or you will perish with it." Jack knew that he was running out of options. He had to make a choice. He could run and try to escape, but the creature wouldn't let them leave. Or he could face it head-on and find a way to defeat it. Either way, the galaxy's fate depended on him now. The storm above them grew louder, and the ground beneath them shook violently once more. Jack made his decision. He wasn't going to run anymore. He was going to face this ancient creature, and he was going to end it, one way or another. The air was thick with tension. Jack could feel the weight of the decision he had made. Standing before this ancient creature, this being of unimaginable power, he realized the true cost of their mission. The artifact they had taken wasn't just a relic. It was a key to unlocking something far greater than any of them had anticipated. The creature, a guardian of this ancient power, had made it clear. They could either serve the power they had awakened, or they could die trying to take it. Jack didn't flinch. The fire inside him burned brighter than ever. He had survived this long by trusting his instincts and doing what had to be done, no matter how impossible it seemed. He wasn't going to let this ancient being decide his fate. He wasn't going to let it decide humanity's fate. "You want the artifact?" Jack said, his voice steady, betraying no hint of fear. "Then you'll have to go through me." The creature's eyes narrowed, its form glowing even brighter in the stormy light. The air hummed with an ominous energy, as if the entire planet was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash. It raised one massive hand, the energy in the air crackling like static electricity, but Jack was already in motion. He had no intention of standing still and waiting to be destroyed. Jack surged forward, using the momentum of his charge to close the gap between himself and the creature. The ground beneath his feet cracked and trembled as if the planet itself was fighting against him. His team was with him, but they knew better than to get in the way. They had seen Jack in action before, and they knew that if there was a chance of survival, it was with him at the forefront. The creature swung its massive arm, sending a wave of energy toward Jack. But Jack was fast, his body trained to move faster than most could even react. He dodged the blast, rolling to the side and using the momentum to close in on his target. With every step, his mind raced. He knew that this creature wasn't just strong, it was ancient, far older than anything in the galaxy. It had lived through eons, and it had seen countless civilizations rise and fall. But Jack was human, and humanity was built on one thing: survival. As Jack approached the creature, he pulled out his weapon, a compact but powerful plasma rifle, and fired. The blast hit the creature, but it barely flinched. The energy around it seemed to absorb the shot, as though the creature itself was one with the planet. Jack gritted his teeth. He had known the creature would be strong, but this was something else. The creature let out a deep, guttural roar, shaking the ground beneath them. The storm in the sky intensified, the lightning crackling in violent bursts. It raised its hand again, this time sending a wave of energy that slammed into the ground, sending shockwaves through the air. Jack was knocked off his feet, his body slamming into the cracked earth. Pain shot through his chest, but he didn't let it stop him. He pushed through the pain, his focus never wavering. "Get up, damn it!" Jack muttered to himself, forcing himself to his feet. The creature towered over him, its glowing eyes locking onto him with an intensity that threatened to crush his spirit, but Jack wouldn't let it. He couldn't afford to, not now. With a fierce growl, Jack charged again, this time more cautiously, using the environment to his advantage. He darted behind rocks and debris, trying to stay out of the creature's line of sight. His team followed his lead, laying down cover fire, but Jack knew that the true battle was his to fight. He had to get close to the creature to figure out how to stop it, and he had only one chance. As Jack approached again, he realized something. The creature wasn't just a mindless monster, it was intelligent. It was thinking, adapting to his movements. It wasn't attacking him blindly, it was testing him, learning from every move. Jack had to outsmart it. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. The artifact in his hands pulsed again, and Jack felt a sudden surge of power course through him. It wasn't just an object, it was a conduit, a tool that could harness the energy of this planet. The realization hit him like a lightning bolt. He didn't just have to fight the creature, he had to use the artifact against it. But how? The creature had been guarding this power for centuries, maybe longer. How could Jack, a single human, use this against something so ancient, so powerful? In that moment, Jack understood. The key was the energy. The artifact was connected to the creature, to the very heart of the planet. If he could draw that energy and use it in the right way, he could defeat the creature and stop the devastation that was beginning to consume the planet. Jack reached out, the artifact in his hands pulsing stronger than before. He closed his eyes, focusing on the energy around him. He could feel it, the power of the ancient civilization, the energy that had been lying dormant for centuries. He could feel it rushing toward him, feeding into the artifact, making him stronger. It was almost overwhelming, but Jack kept his focus. He opened his eyes, locking onto the creature once again. The creature had been watching him, waiting for him to make his move. But now Jack had the power, and he wasn't going to hesitate. With a roar of his own, Jack unleashed the energy. The artifact flared brightly, sending a wave of energy toward the creature. The creature screamed, the energy crashing into it, pushing it back. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The storm above them paused, the world holding its breath. Then the creature let out a terrible screech, a sound so loud and agonizing that it seemed to shake the very foundations of the planet. The energy around it began to distort, the runes on its body flickering and twisting. It was being torn apart, the power of the artifact overwhelming it. Jack didn't stop. He poured every ounce of energy he could into the artifact, fueling the wave of power that surged toward the creature. The creature's form began to flicker, its massive body breaking apart, the ancient energy it had drawn upon for so long unraveling. It howled in agony, but Jack didn't relent. He couldn't afford to, not after everything that had happened. Finally, with a final, deafening roar, the creature collapsed. The energy that had once powered it disappeared, and the storm above the planet began to subside. The ground beneath them stopped shaking, and the silence that followed was almost deafening. Jack stood there, panting, his body aching from the effort, but he knew the battle wasn't over yet. The artifact was still pulsing in his hands, but now it was quiet. The energy had faded, and Jack could feel that the creature was gone. They had done it. They had defeated it. But Jack knew this victory came at a cost. The temple had collapsed, the planet was still unstable, and the artifact's true purpose had only just begun to unfold. "Let's get out of here," Jack said, his voice hoarse but resolute. He looked back at his team. They had survived, but the real challenge was just beginning. They still had to figure out what to do with the artifact, and how to make sure nothing like this ever happened again. The battle was over, and yet the air still hummed with an unnatural energy. Jack and his team stood amidst the wreckage of the ancient temple, the remains of the once powerful creature now scattered in glowing fragments across the ground. The storm above had cleared, leaving only a quiet, eerie calm in its wake. Jack could still feel the power of the artifact pulsing in his hands, but the weight of what had just happened was starting to settle in. They had done it. Against all odds, they had defeated the creature. But the victory felt hollow, as though the real battle had only just begun. Jack looked around at his team, Lieutenant Novick, Sergeant Carter, and the others, each of them breathing heavily, their faces streaked with dirt and exhaustion. They had fought alongside him, and now they had survived together. But Jack knew that their work was far from over. The artifact they had taken from the planet was still in their possession, and with it came the power to change everything. "We need to move," Jack said, his voice quiet but firm. "The planet's not safe anymore, and we don't know what's going to happen next. We need to get to the ship, and we need to get off this planet." His team nodded in agreement, their eyes wary as they glanced around at the wreckage. The ground was still unstable, cracks running through the earth as if the planet itself were trying to recover from the disturbance they had caused. The air was thick with the smell of burning stone and the distant hum of the artifact's energy. Jack led the way, his steps sure and steady. He had faced countless dangers before, but this felt different. This mission, this planet, had changed something in him. He had seen the power that lay within humanity, and he had seen just how much they were capable of when pushed to the limit. As they made their way toward the ship, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It wasn't just the strange energy in the air or the remnants of the battle that weighed on him. It was something deeper. The artifact, the ancient power they had uncovered, was more than just a weapon. It was a key, a piece of a much larger puzzle that they had only begun to understand. When they reached the ship, the crew immediately began preparing for launch. Jack didn't need to give orders, they knew what had to be done. The storm outside had passed, but the planet's surface was still unpredictable. The sooner they left, the better. Jack stepped onto the ship, looking back at the planet one last time. It was a desolate world now, its once hidden secrets revealed. And though they had come for an artifact, what they had found was far more than they had bargained for. They had unleashed something ancient, something powerful, and now the galaxy would have to deal with the consequences. Once the ship was in the air, Jack walked to the cockpit, where Lieutenant Novik was already at the controls. "Ready for departure?" Jack asked, his voice low. "Ready as we'll ever be," she replied, her fingers flying over the controls as the ship began its ascent from the planet's surface. "What do we do now?" Jack stared out the window at the shrinking planet below. His mind was racing, but his resolve was clear. "Now we make sure this doesn't happen again." They didn't speak much on the way back to their base. Each of them was lost in their own thoughts, processing everything that had happened. The artifact pulsed quietly in the ship's storage room, its power still radiating, still unknown. They had come for a weapon, but they had ended up with something far more dangerous. When they arrived at their base, the first thing Jack did was report to the Academy's top brass. The general and the other high-ranking officers listened intently as Jack detailed their mission, their discovery, and their victory over the creature. But it was clear that they didn't fully understand what they were dealing with. They saw the artifact as just another piece of alien technology to be studied and potentially weaponized. They didn't see the danger. Jack knew that something had to be done to prevent the artifact from falling into the wrong hands. If the galaxy's powers, especially the Zorvans, got hold of it, there was no telling what kind of destruction they could cause. "We need to lock this down," Jack said to the general, his voice firm. "This artifact is too dangerous. We don't know what it's capable of. If we let it fall into the wrong hands, we'll all pay the price." The general nodded, his face grave. "Understood, but we'll need time to analyze it. You can't just destroy it. We need to understand what it can do." Jack shook his head. "We don't have that kind of time. If we don't act now, the consequences will be worse than anything we've ever faced. Trust me, General, I've seen what this thing can do. I've felt its power." The general hesitated, but then nodded, making a decision that would change the course of history. "We'll lock it down. But we're not making any decisions without further analysis." Jack didn't argue. He had learned long ago that the military played by its own rules, and he wasn't about to waste time debating. Instead, he focused on what he could control. The artifact had to be contained, and Jack had to make sure it stayed that way. The days that followed were filled with preparations. The artifact was stored in a secure facility, surrounded by layers of high-tech security systems. But Jack couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. The power that the artifact contained was far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. And while they may have contained it for now, Jack knew it wouldn't stay contained forever. Sooner or later, someone would find a way to break through. As Jack worked with the team to secure the facility, he began to make plans of his own. He knew that the true battle was still to come. The galaxy was shifting, and humanity's role in it was changing. They had proven that they were capable of surviving against impossible odds, but they were no longer alone in the fight for survival. The galaxy's powers were watching, and they would want the artifact for themselves. Jack knew that humanity's future depended on what they did next. The galaxy was on the brink of something far greater than anyone could imagine, and humanity had just become part of it. They could no longer remain hidden, isolated in the shadows. They would have to stand up, face the challenges ahead, and prove that they were more than just survivors. They were leaders, capable of shaping the future. Jack didn't know exactly how they would do it, but he knew that humanity's time had come. The galaxy would never look at them the same way again. And as long as Jack O'Connell was alive, humanity would fight with everything it had, proving to the galaxy that they could not be underestimated. He stood at the window of the base, looking out at the stars, his mind racing. He could feel the weight of what lay ahead. It wouldn't be easy. There would be obstacles, there would be enemies, and there would be sacrifices. But humanity had always survived. And now they had something more, something that would change everything.